This is going to be kind of a lengthy one, but it was downright one of the freakiest things that I've ever had the displeasure of experiencing. About 2 weeks ago, my boyfriend and I went on a trip all around California. Our last stop was San Francisco, and although we had a place to stay the next day, the night we arrived, we were unprepared and had to stay at a Motel 6 in a super crappy part of San Fran. The motel was actually very nice on the inside, and we got an entertaining view of the never-ending crap that went on the streets below us. We were on the 3rd floor. Anyway, everything was cool, and we stayed in for the night. We ordered crappy room service food and watched the Travel Channel. So, nothing weird happened, until about nearly 8 in the morning. We were fast asleep, as we should have been, until we were awoken by the sounds of huge blows to the door, as well as yelling. Both my boyfriend, T, and I were nowhere near the functioning, and very confused in our sleepy state. Our first instincts were, maybe it's room service getting the wrong room, maybe somebody's in trouble, etc. T rolled out of bed to go check it out. At this point, I feel it's important to mention that the motel room door was down a small hallway in the room itself, so you cannot see the door from the bed or anything. Just hear what's going on. The man is still slamming his hands against the door, and I hear him yelling, "Stan, open up, man!" I hear the door open a crack, and T asks, "Hello? What's going on?" The reply is from a black man's voice. He's near shouting and sounds extremely urgent. I hear him say, "Dude, what the hell? I told you I'd be here at 8, man." At this time, I'm sitting up in bed, more awake and listening to the whole thing since I can't see the door. T says back sleepily, "What? I think you got the wrong room, man. I don't know who you are." The man yells back, "Yes, you do, man. You have my clothes, bro." My heart was racing, and I could only imagine how T felt. I hear a little bit of a tussle at the door, and the man's voice sounds closer. I then realize that he has reached his hand through the cracked door and unlocked the deadbolt. He's in the room now. "I can't believe this, man. Let me come in and get my clothes, man." I hear T's voice, which sounds very level-headed for how scary the situation is, say, "Listen, I don't know you. I don't know Stan. I can call the front desk. My girlfriend and I just got here. We just checked into this room last night." The man cuts him off angrily. "Man, I don't need you to call no front desk." And then he says, "Yo, don't be aggressive with me, man." Hypocritical. There is a long pause of silence. I could feel the tension. T says, "I'm sorry, but you have to go, man. It's 8 in the morning. I'm really sorry." The guy replies, "Listen, I ain't got no weapons on me. Just let me come in. I need to take a shower, man." At this point, my heart's racing. I'm a blonde girl, 5'4", sitting up in bed, naked, with a sheet around me. T is 5'7" and thin. No way would we be able to take someone in a fight. And there's a strange man who might be on or into drugs in the room with us. I realize he doesn't know I'm in the room, and it's just not my boyfriend here. I decide to make my presence known. I call out shakily, "T, we can leave if we have to. It's not a problem." I'm planning to make a quick escape, grab all of our stuff, and make a run if need be. Hearing me, the man finally bounds into the room, says cheerily, "See, she knows him." That sent chills down my spine for some reason. He makes his way around the room. After what feels like forever, he finally says, "Oh shit, this is the wrong room." Cue the laugh track. T throws his hands up and says, Okay, so leave, please." The guy stands there. I'm honestly waiting for him to pull out that weapon he said he doesn't have. But T proceeded to lightly start pushing the guy on his back towards the door. It's time for you to go, man. I'm sorry. I hear them make their way towards the door, and I hear the guy say, "Yo, don't push the door, bro," as if he still wasn't planning on leaving. Before the door closes, I also hear him say, "Don't grab my arm, man." I make the connection that T tried to grab him and push him out. T replies, "Well, then go, please." He sounds distraught. Finally, the door makes the closing sound, and the locks click, and I just about throw up. I hear the man stumbling around outside the hallway. After an eternity, it sounds like he's gone. Great way to break into a new city. We left about an hour later. Going back to sleep wasn't even an option. When we did leave, and were in the car, driving out of the parking garage, we stopped at a crosswalk. It looked like the same man. I swear to it. He was crossing in front of our car. He turned and looked at it, peering right into it with the deepest gaze and barely any expression. More than anything, we were glad to be alive that day. My boyfriend endlessly repeating, "I shouldn't have opened that door at all. Idiot, idiot, idiot." But anyway, creepy guy who forgot his clothes, let's not meet. Ever. I recently got into contact with a childhood friend who reminded me of a particularly weird incident that happened to us. School had just ended, so my friends and I were taking our usual route home, which had a car dealership, some houses, and a church along the way. The church always seemed to be empty. I frequently walked my dog around the area, and out of the 4 years I lived there, I had never seen anyone go in or out. Anyways, as we approached the church, we noticed a table with 2 men sitting behind it. They called us over, and one of my friends, out of a group of 5 including myself, decided to dumbly wander over to them instead of ignoring them like we normally would have done. They began to ask us questions, focusing on the 3 girls more than the remaining boys. They were young, probably in their early 20s, very charismatic. They asked us how old we were, where we lived, and whether or not we went to this church. After a bit of conversation, they learned that I lived the closest to the church, so they focused on me, which seemed somewhat odd to me. You would think that they'd be happy enough to get anyone to come to the church. 2 of my friends had wandered off to a store not too far, so it was just a boy, another female, and myself. At this point, the 2 men had ignored my friends altogether. Apparently, they were trying to get younger people to join their youth group. Mind you, they had no flyers, nothing signifying that they actually worked for the church. They were dressed casually, with a cooler nearby. At the time, this didn't raise any red flags. They zoned in on me. The younger one began to flirt with me, complimenting me, going on to say how great it would be to see me at the youth group. He said that the people who attended were really good people, and I'd have tons of fun, and they were about to start soon. I had no intention of going, but went along with it just to be polite, saying that I had to get home to change or something along those lines. Before we left, he pulled out a bottle of Coke from the cooler. He handed it to me with a smile and really invaded my personal space. "It starts in a few minutes. I hope you can make it to the meeting," he shouts as my friends and I quickly walk off. My friends and I stood in front of my house for a little while, chatting and joking around, completely forgetting about what had just occurred, brushing it off as just eccentric church recruiters. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw a figure at the end of the street. I had just assumed it was another student walking by to their home. I came to learn that it wasn't. Once my friends had said their goodbyes, I walked into my home and went straight for the kitchen, as most kids do once they get home. I made a snack and decided to drink the Coke I was so graciously given. 20 minutes later, I didn't feel too good, so I sat on the couch and hoped it'd go away. At the time, I was suffering from chronic migraines, so I assumed it was due to that. I remember feeling a wave of drowsiness crash over me, but nothing else ever after that. According to my mother, she tried repeatedly to wake me up to no avail. I'm not a heavy sleeper. Any little noise tends to wake me up, but not this time. I had apparently fallen asleep at around 3 in the afternoon, and I didn't wake up until 12 in the afternoon the next day. At that, I didn't feel good at all. I was sweating, felt woozy, and I couldn't bring myself to move for a little while. I can't say for sure that I was drugged or anything like that, but what struck me as odd was that my mom had also said that a young white guy had come to look for me about an hour after I had fallen asleep, claiming that I was a friend and wanted to see if I could hang out. I don't know what their intentions were, or if they were really representing the church, but shady church recruiters, let's not meet. Back when I was in the 11th grade, about 12 years ago, I was a bit of a troubled teen. After growing out of that awkward stage, I suppose the new attention from boys often clouded my judgment. One day, at school, a classmate told me that he had a friend who had seen me on the school bus and thought I was cute. So, he got my number to give to the guy. This would be a mistake. That afternoon, the classmate calls and puts his friend on the phone. The guy says his name is Slim. Slim is friendly, but something seems odd about him. I couldn't put my finger on it at the time, though. He didn't talk like me or my friends, but he was from California, so I thought maybe that was why. I asked how old he was, and he said 18. Me being 16, I didn't have a problem with it. I told him I was 16, and we started talking. I suppose his conscience was getting to him, because within a couple of weeks, he admitted that he was actually older. He said that he was really 21, which still wasn't a big deal. I thought it was cool to date guys a few years older than me. I noticed that sometimes he'd get really annoying and say off-the-wall things, such as how the trees talk to him when he sits outside. The classmate that introduced us smoked a lot of weed, so I figured Slim was just high when he was saying that. I found out later that he was high, on crack. At times, he would begin saying sexual things to me, and I would get uncomfortable and ask him to stop. Most of the time, he did, but when he didn't, I'd hang up on him. He'd call back and apologize. Most of the time, he just talked about us, maybe getting together, getting married, having kids one day. At that point, I should have just stopped talking to him. But I've always hated hurting people's feelings, so I'm too nice at times. Thinking I could just distract him, I gave him a friend's phone number, hoping he'd take a liking to her and forget about me. He began calling her as well, but he wasn't saying the sexual things to her like he did to me. At the time, he was more of an annoyance than anything I felt I needed to worry about, but that would soon change. I think he grew tired of the 21-year-old charade and began getting sloppy with what he said. At one point, he told me that he had played baseball in high school against Mark McGuire. My blood ran cold as I realized that Mark McGuire was around 40 years old. He said, "Do you know what that means?" I said, "You're not 21, are you?" He admitted that he was, in fact, 38 years old. Literally the same age as my dad. I felt so sick thinking back at all the sexual things that he had said to me. I don't know what to say, so I just played it off, not knowing what else to do, and wanting to get my parents involved. one Saturday evening, he called, and I said I was on my way out the door and I couldn't talk. He knew that I went to the skating rink with my friends on weekends, and he told me that he was going too, so he could finally meet me. I got upset, and I told him not to come up there, that I didn't want to see him. I got off the phone, and my friends drove us to the skating rink. I had a great time, and I forgot about Slim until I got home and the phone rang. As soon as I answered and heard his voice, I began to feel sick. He asked if I had fun, and I said yes. He told me that he had been there. I didn't recall seeing anyone unfamiliar, so I called his bluff and I told him he was lying. He then told me what vehicle my friend drove and what I had been wearing exactly. He said in an amused voice, "I was sitting in my car in the parking lot. You walked right past my car, but you had your head down so you didn't see me. You looked so good, and I almost got out of my car to talk to you, but there were a lot of people around. You have nice breasts and ass. You know I could please you if you'd just give me the chance." I felt more violated than I ever had before, and I went off on him, and then I hung up. He called back about 10 times in a row, but I just ignored it. The calls eventually tapered off, and he became just a memory, for a few years anyway. When I was 19, I worked at a grocery store in the office. The phone rang one day, and I heard a familiar voice on the other end. It was Slim. He told me that he had been in the store and saw me, but he was unable to speak to me because my boss was in the office with me. He told me that he was going to have a friend bring him up there to see me, and that I'd know him because he was bald, and his friends all told him he looked like Charles Barkley, and he had a chipped tooth. I told him to never come to my job, that there wasn't a single part of me that ever wanted to see him. He said, "Okay," and got off the phone, but I had a feeling I'd have a close encounter soon. Around 2 p.m., it had gotten pretty slow, and I was hanging out in the office. All of a sudden, this bald guy comes to the window and greets me. The voice made my blood run cold. I look up and I see Charles Barkley. If he had been an addict for the last 20 years. The chipped tooth was actually just gone. The sight of him made me want to throw up. I was extremely pissed off at this point, and I told him to get out of the store and never come back, and never speak to me again. He looked disappointed, but he apologized and left. I told the manager, and he said that if Slim ever came back in the store ever again, to tell him, and he'd have him arrested. I had to be escorted to my car by a male co-worker for weeks after that. That was luckily the last time I heard from him, and the only time that we came face to face. I believe that he's moved back to California now. So Slim, you filthy crackhead pedophile, let's not meet again. I developed very early in life. At the age of 12 years old, I was a 34 triple G. If you are a woman, you know that this is no way for a 12-year-old middle schooler to live. I have found myself in a wide array of uncomfortable situations. Everything ranging from sexual harassment to bullying to unwanted attention. Oftentimes, when we went shopping, I would get approached by much older men, 30s and above, who would have only one thing on their minds. Because of this, I had a very thick skin. But looking back, if my mother's intuition did not save me, I have no idea where I would be right now. When I was 15, my usual after-school routine was to walk down the hill and meet my mom at the grocery store, where she would pick me up after she got out of work. My school let out at 2:30. Hers at 3:15, respectively. So oftentimes, I would walk around the store and read magazines until she called me to come outside. We did this for the past 6 months or so, and never had any concerns, until the Friday before spring break. My mom was very cautious and strict with the clothing I wore. She definitely never allowed me to wear cute tops that underage girls often wore. I was always covered up in a sweatshirt, even on the hottest days. On this day, she called me at about 3 o'clock, stating she was running late and that I should walk home, which I was only about a half hour away. Of course I'd walk, freedom, and no sweatshirt in the heat. I walked out of the store and proceeded to walk home. I was about 15 minutes into the walk when a large white van pulled up beside me. On a residential street, there was no traffic. It was slowly inching at my pace, and I looked up to see 4 huge guys, probably late 20s or so, just staring at me through the windows. I walked faster to avoid them, but the van kept on crawling along. Suddenly, the passenger side door opened, and one guy got out. He subsequently approached me and started asking me questions. How old I was, where do I go to school, do I have a boyfriend, etc. I ignored him, and I started walking on the grass to distance myself from him. He started talking to me about how he runs a photography business, and that I was beautiful enough to be a model. I continued to ignore him. I'd say this went on for only 3 to 4 minutes, but it felt like eternity. I told him to leave me alone, when he suddenly rushed towards me and grabbed a hold of my backpack, trying to drag me back towards him and into the van. I let out the most blood-curdling scream I could muster, and I began struggling with him. The back door opened, and I could see ropes, duct tape, blindfolds, and kitchen knives all over the back seats. I thought my life was over before I knew it. As our struggle continued, I was about 5 feet away from getting pushed inside the van when I heard honking coming from behind me. I looked back to see my mom's Suburban speeding down the street like a madwoman, coming to a stop directly next to me. Before we knew what happened, she rushed out of her car with a baseball bat in hand, ran over to the guy who had me, and swung the bat, busting him in the ribs. The man let out a cry of pain. He let go of me and my bag, forced himself into the van, and it sped off with him clutching his abdomen. I was crying profusely. My mom stood there with me, consoling me, and telling me that everything would be all right. She immediately called the cops, and they came out to investigate. She had one of those dash cams which caught the whole thing on camera, and the police were able to locate the vehicle hours later, arresting all 4 guys inside it. Later that night, she told me that as soon as she got off the phone with me, she got the most horrible migraine she had ever experienced, and that she saw flashes of me lying in a ditch on the outskirts of town. She grabbed her keys, got in the car, and took off, ultimately finding me seconds before tragedy hit. Weeks later, the cops showed up at our door and stated that the guys in the van were human traffickers who had ties to Thailand, Mexico, and Italy. The bond between my mother and I as strong as ever. I grew up in a strange area. It was basically in a tiny ghetto in the middle of nowhere. A lot of drug and violent crime for being in the country. As you can imagine, I have a lot of stories that fit with the theme of this subreddit as a result. This particular incident happened when I was 5. My mom worked a regular full-time 9-to-5 job, so my mom would leave me at my grandma's in the mornings to get to the bus to school, then pick me back up from her house after the bus took me there and she got home from work. My grandma was a wonderful old lady, still is, and she lived just a few streets away, so it was convenient for everybody. My mother had just brought me home for the evening. She parked the car and started walking toward the house. Our neighbor John was sitting outside his home with a bunch of furniture in his yard. We usually exchange friendly hellos, and that day was no exception. He mentioned that he was trying to get rid of this furniture surrounding him and asked if we needed anything. It was all free. My mom declined, but said that she could ask around. Being a child, I didn't think much of his response, but my mom was clearly shaken. "All right, but if anyone wants it, they better hurry. It's all going up in flames." My mom tried to push it out of her mind, took me inside, and began giving me a bath. About 5 to 15 minutes later, after we got inside, there was a knock at the door. My mom left me in the tub to see who was there. I paid no mind and continued playing with my toys in the bath. But my mother rushed back into the bathroom shortly and frantically scooped me up from the tub and began drying me. She told me to hurry and get ready. We were going to Grandma's. Again, being a kid, the fact that we were going back to Grandma's after we had just left didn't set off any alarm bells. I was just pleased to get to spend more time over there. My mom carried me outside, and that's when I realized something was seriously wrong. "Mommy, why is there blood on our door?" She refused to answer and kept insisting we were going to Grandma's, though I noticed there was blood splattered on the porch as well. Now I need to explain that the closest place to our house to park a car was actually on the street over, where neighbor John lived. So we couldn't see the street the car was on until we got right up to it, where a large fleet of police and other emergency vehicles were blocking everything off. Looks like we aren't going to Grandma's after all. Boo. The whole town was there, watching a heated standoff between the police and John. He had gone on a drug-induced rampage, busted out all the windows of his home and several neighboring homes, doused the homes and himself in gasoline, and it intended to blow it all sky high. It ended when he pulled a matchbook from his pocket, went to strike a match, but the book had been too saturated in gas to spark. The police tackled him to the ground, cut off his clothes. I found this part extremely funny at the time. The other neighborhood kids and I had a heyday with the naked man story for weeks, and they took him away. Since this story has been told from my perspective up to this point, you may be wondering what happened when my mom went to the door while I was in the bath. She said that when she opened the door, there was a crazed-looking John standing at the door, bleeding heavily from his hands, reeking of gasoline. She said he told her, "Get your kid and get out now. It's all going up in flames." Apparently, in his drugged-out state, he mustered up enough of a conscience to save the single mother and child from his rampage. Either way, neighbor John, let's not meet again.